Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to present an overview and summary of the introduction to Arnold Toynbee's A Study of History. It should be noted that I'm basing this off of the abridged introduction, which is contained in the 1947 abridgment of volumes 1 through 6, edited by D.C. Somervell. Chapter 1, the Unit of Historical Study. For an introduction, Toynbee starts with defining what he terms the unit of historical study. By this, he means the focal point of which a historian should direct their research to. Toynbee laments that it's the habit of historians to make the nation-state the basis of history. This is out of a belief that nations are self-sufficient and can independently develop without outside influence. Toynbee argues that Great Britain on the surface has the best claim to this, but on closer inspection this simply isn't true. Many examples are provided, including the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity in the 6th century, the creation of the feudal system, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the creation of a parliamentary system, and the Industrial Revolution. All of these examples would not have been possible without interactions with other parts of Europe. Toynbee used the term societies, which he defines as a collection of nations which have shared cultural norms as his main unit of focus. An example would be Western society, which contains countries such as Britain, America, France, and Germany. The society is the whole, and the countries form a part of the whole. Each part may react differently in response to certain causes, but their responses then shape the rest of the society. Toynbee argues that in order to appreciate events, you have to look at how each part reacts, rather than just one part in isolation. An example can be found in ancient Greece between 725 to 325 BC, which had to find a solution to the problem of overpopulation. Some parts of the society, such as Chalkis and Corinth, dealt with the problem by settling their surplus population into colonies throughout the Mediterranean. Sparta, meanwhile, warred with other Greek states to conquer territory for agricultural production. Athens went their own way and specialized her agricultural produce for export, developed manufacturing, and changed her political institutions. The sum of all these responses are what is required to understand how the Hellenic society would develop going forward. Toynbee also stipulates that we have to draw clear boundaries of where each society begins and ends. For example, the parliamentary system that is affiliated with nations in the Western society, such as Great Britain, are not typically associated with states such as the Russian or Ottoman empires. When reviewing other phenomena, such as the Reformation and the feudal system, we can safely ignore developments in states outside of Western society. In reference back to the Anglo-Saxons' conversion to Christianity, Toynbee argues that this event firmly placed England into the Western society, as we now have a shared common religious belief with the society's other members. A society can exert influence upon other societies, such as the Western society has done. This is through the fields of economics, politics, and culture. The former two, by the time of the 1930s when Toynbee was writing, had essentially become universal as the world had become economically and politically interconnected. However, the cultural sphere is the only field the Western society hasn't managed to fully exert its dominance over. If we go back through history, the field of influence of the Western society was not always so widespread and hegemonic. In the time of Charlemagne, the Western society was limited to England, Wales, France, the Low Countries, most of Germany, Austria, Switzerland, northern Italy, and a small sliver of northern Spain. At the time of writing the study, Toynbee identified four other existing societies: an Orthodox Christian society in southeastern Europe and Russia, an Islamic society which stretches across North Africa and the Middle East, a Hindu society in the Indian subcontinent, and a Far Eastern society in Eastern Asia. Toynbee also identifies several fossil societies, such as the Christian communities in Armenia, Iraq, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the Indian region of Malabar. Other fossil societies include the Jews, the Parsi community of Mumbai in India, the Buddhists in Tibet, Mongolia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, and Cambodia, as well as the Jains in India. Since the inception of Western society, the number of societies has remained constant. Toynbee identifies the kinds of relationship, that between two parts of one society and that between two societies themselves. Though we have explored Western society's influence in space, we must also consider its influence in time. We can only speculate about the future, however, we can learn a lot by again returning to the beginning of Western society. After the Treaty of Verdun in 843 AD, which partitioned the empire of Charlemagne between his three grandsons, Lothair I acquired an area that stretched from central Italy to the Netherlands and included Germany up to the Rhine and eastern France. Toynbee notes that this same territorial area that was the frontier of the Roman Empire was now the core of our Western society, with influence spreading both east and west. Toynbee then says during the deep sleep of the interval, circa AD 375 to 675, which intervened between the breakup of the Roman Empire and the gradual emergence of our Western society out of the chaos, a rib was taken from the side of the older society and was fashioned into the backbone of a new creature of the same species. A Western historian would argue this occurred because of the West Christian Church, which had pushed up towards the frontier, came into contact with the Germanic barbarians that pressed in from the outside. These two elements would form the basis of our Western society. If we go back further, we can see that Rome expanded beyond the Alps in reaction to the external threat of Carthage. She stopped at the Rhine because her vitality gave out after 2 centuries of war and revolution. The barbarians broke through as when a more advanced society ceases its pressure upon the lesser, this does not lead to an equilibrium but rather an incline towards the lesser society's favour. Over time, the barbarians encountered the Christian church on the other side of the frontier because over the centuries, slaves from the east had brought into the empire's core. Their religion spread into the Greco-Roman society. The influence was widespread because it managed to capture the elite, which Toynbee refers to as a dominant minority, who had failed to save the fortunes of the society. A historian of the Greco-Roman society would see the barbarians and the Christian church as alien outsiders, the former an external proletariat and the latter an internal proletariat. Both of these groups were largely ignored by the elite and became alienated in the society after its strength had been undermined due to the Second Punic War. Toynbee concludes the chapter by reiterating that as we reach back into the past, we see a continuity of history. When we look at the birth of our own Western society, to quote him directly, we have stumbled upon the deathbed of another, as we can see the demise of the Greco-Roman society, which itself stretches back further into the past. The relationship between the Greco-Roman and the Western is like that between a parent and child. We've also established that the best units of historical study are groupings of culturally similar peoples, which is called a society. We've also concluded that there are 5 such societies, including our own. In the next chapter, Toynbee compiles a list of all the societies that have existed throughout history and in their relationship to one another. Chapter 2, the comparative study of civilizations. In this chapter, Toynbee begins by establishing the components of apparentation and affiliation that are necessary to deduce if the other societies have a predecessor. The first component is that of the universal state, a government that incorporates the whole society, such as the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was preceded by a period of decline, which Toynbee terms a time of troubles. The establishment of the empire arrested the decline, but the causes of decline were still present, resulting in the destruction of the Hellenic society and the Roman Empire with it. The collapse of the Roman Empire was followed by an interregnum before the establishment of our Western society. This interregnum was dominated by 2 institutions, the Christian Church, which survived the fall of Rome, and a collection of successor states on the empire's old territory. These states were created as a result of the invading barbarian tribes, which Toynbee refers to as a Völkerwanderung, from the German, literally wandering of the folk or people. The church survived the fall of Rome because it provided leadership and became the womb from which the new Western society would be birthed. The contribution of the barbarian successor states to our affiliation with the Hellenic society was negligible, as many of them were conquered and destroyed before they had any lasting impact. The barbarian significance was that they appeared at the epilogue of the Hellenic society, feasting off the carcass of an already dead empire. The 3 factors marked the transition from an old to a new society: the creation of a universal state in the latter period, an establishment of a universal church within the old society that would go on to develop the new society, and the intrusion of a barbarian heroic age. Toynbee then proceeds to list all the societies that can be identified through history. The Orthodox Christian Society. This society is the twin offspring of the Western society, its geographic displacement being towards the northeast. This cradle was Byzantine Anatolia, from where it spread through to Russia and Siberia. The split that resulted in the 2 twin societies was a divide in their common chrysalis, the Christian church into 2 churches, the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox. The schism took centuries to work itself before its final definitive split in 1054 AD. Whereas the Roman Catholic Church centralised power under an independent papacy, the Orthodox Church was sublimated under the firm authority of the Byzantine state. The Iranic, Arabic, and Syriac societies. When we look at the history of the Islamic society, we can clearly discern a universal state, the Abbasid Caliphate, a universal church, Islam itself, and a Volkerwanderung, which consisted of Turkish, Mongol, Berber, and Arab nomads. The resulting interregnum lasted from 975 AD to 1275 AD, which resulted in the Islamic society. These elements are analogous, but not identical to their respective counterparts in the history of the Western and Orthodox societies. There are complications, however, first of which is that the predecessor of the Islamic society also beget two twin societies like the Hellenic society. However, these two pairs of twins are strikingly dissimilar. Where the Western and Orthodox have lived side by side for almost 1,000 years in the Islamic society, one of the twins swallowed up and incorporated the other. Toynbee calls these twin Islamic societies the Arabic and the Iranic. He also states that their differentiation was not as a result of religion, though Shia Islam would come to nest within the central axis of the Iranic society, which runs from Afghanistan in the east to Turkey in the west, leaving Sunni Islam dominant in the extreme ends and in the Arabic society. Toynbee notes that the Iranic society bears some resemblance to the Western society, and likewise to the Arabic and Orthodox societies. For example, the spirit of the Caliphate was evoked by the Mamluks in Cairo, like Leo the Syrian evoked the spirit of Rome at Constantinople in the 8th century. Both of these states were compact and long-lasting. In contrast, the empire of Tamerlane in the Iranian society was large and ephemeral, like that of Charlemagne's in the West. Both empires would be gone within a couple of generations. The Arabic and Iranian were languages of both respective societies, though the latter grafted itself onto the former in a similar way to how Latin grafted itself onto the Greek. Furthermore, the absorption of the Arabic society by the Iranic society in the 16th century parallels the aggression towards Orthodox society by the Western society during the Crusades, culminating in the 1204 sack of Constantinople. The main difference between the Syriac society and the Hellenic society is that rather than a time of troubles preceding the creation of a universal state, as is the case with the Roman Empire, we instead have another universal state, the Umayyad Caliphate, and before that, 1,000 years of Hellenic intrusion. The intrusion began with the campaigns of Alexander in the 4th century BC and culminates in Oriental revanche by the Islamic Arabs in the 7th century AD, which opens up the way for a universal state to take the place that the Achaemenid Empire once had. Even roughly corresponding to similar frontiers, the Achaemenid Empire was preceded by a time of troubles like the Roman Empire, except it was another state, that of the Assyrian Empire, which had reaped its own destruction, allowing the Achaemenid Empire to establish itself. However, the Assyrian state belonged to a different society to the Achaemenid Empire. Indeed, after the latter's creation, all of the cultural influence of the Assyrians was expunged as the Aramaic language and scripts came to supplant the Akkadian language and cuneiform in Mesopotamia. The Aramaic script would also be adopted for the Iranian language. From this, Toynbee derives the name Syriac society, the progenitor society for both the Arabic and the Iranic. It's been alluded to previously that Islam was a universal church of the Syriac society. Toynbee compares Islam to Christianity, the latter being the universal church of the Western society. Both churches were Syriac creations, therefore, the Western society's universal church was an alien creation, whilst the Syriac's was native. The Indic Society. The history of the Indic Society also has the same tokens as the previous cases. The universal state is the Gupta Empire, the universal church is Hinduism, and the Volkerwanderung was that of the Huns. The interregnum period is filled by various states as corresponds to the years 475 to 775 AD. Thereafter, we see the emergence of the Hindu society. The Indic society suffered a Hellenic intrusion, like the Syriac society, though on a smaller scale, and at a later time during the 2nd century AD, with the invasion by the Greek kingdom of Bactria, which lasted until the expulsion of the last Hellenized intruders in 390 AD by the Guptas. Toynbee then argues that the Guptas, like the Abbasids, are post-Hellenic recreation of a previous universal state, that of the Mauryan Empire of Chandragupta and Ashoka. The time of troubles that preceded this universal state was dominated by wars between smaller states and the spiritualism of Siddhartha Buddha and Mahavira, the founders of Buddhism and Jainism respectively. From its original home in the Gangetic plain of northern India, the Indic society roughly matches that of the Hindu society, though the later would spread to cover the whole Indian subcontinent. The Cynic Society. In the background of this society, we can find a universal state established by the Qin in 221 BC. The Universal Church was Mahayana Buddhism, and the Volkawandarung was the Eurasian nomads who invaded circa 300 AD. The Cynic time of troubles was the Chang Kuo, or the period of contending states, which started from 479 BC until 221 BC. The Cynic time of troubles was similar to the Hellenic, as it was dominated by philosophers such as Confucius and Lao Tzu. Mahayana Buddhism was again another example of an alien universal church, its origins coming from the Indic. The original home of the Cynic society was the Yellow River Basin, and its succeeding Far Eastern society stretches over the whole of China, Korea, and Japan. The fossils. After surveying the previously listed discussed societies, Toynbee then goes on to categorize the fossils mentioned earlier to their corresponding societies. The Jews, Parsis, as well as the Monophysites and Nestorian Christians all are remnants of the Syriac society. The Jains, Hinayanian Buddhists, and the Lamaistic Buddhists are the fossils of the Indic society. The Minoan society. In the background of the Hellenic society, signs of a pre-existing society are evident. The universal state was the thalassocracy, or maritime empire of Minos on the island of Crete. The Volkawandarung was the Achaean barbarians of mainland Greece who conquered Minos, the Hittite Empire, and invaded but not did conquer the Egyptian New Kingdom. The period of this interregnum falls between 1400 and 1125 BC. Toynbee then questions whether there is any justification in linking the Minoan and Hellenic societies, as the universal church, that of Pan-Hellenism, was a product of the Achaeans and not the Minoans. We have very limited knowledge of the Minoan religion, but what we do know is there was a veneration of a divine mother, so we at least know that it was monotheistic. There are echoes or a ghost of the Minoan universal church in such Hellenic practices as the Eleusinian mysteries and Orphism. From this, Toynbee then speculates on the origins of the Syriac society, as the conquest of Minos leads to the great wave of migrants seeking a new home. These wanderers would come to the coast of the Levant and become the Philistines, who would interact with the Hebrew nomads driven out of Egypt. Further north, the mountains of Lebanon would shelter the Phoenicians and the Aramaean nomads of the interior. From these elements, a Syriac society would be born. Toynbee surmises that it can be surprising that the Minoan society is apparented to the Syriac and the parent isn't found in either the Egyptian New Kingdom, the Hittite Empire, or even the states of Ur or Babylon. The Sumeric society. In the background of the Indic society, we can see that the universal church, like that of the Hellenic society, was brought in from the Volkawandarung, which is, in the case of the Indic society, were the Arya people from the Eurasian steppe. The cause of the Arya Volkawandarung was the breakdown of the Empire of Sumer and Akkad, which had been established in 2298 BC and restored by Hammurabi in 1947 BC. Though this empire did not extend to the Indian subcontinent, it at least had some influence on the Indus Valley civilization. The antecedents of the empire can be found in its own time of troubles, in which the Akkadian military figure Sargon the Great featured prominently. The Hittite and Babylonic societies. The Sumeric civilization extended into East Anatolia. After its universal state broke down, it was occupied by barbarians from the northwest, establishing the Hatti Empire, which became the core of the Hittite society. The empire would be destroyed by the same Volkawandarung that destroyed the Minoan society. In Iraq, Kassites in Iran ruled for several centuries before the rise of a new Babylonic society. During its last century, it suffered a terrible war between Assyria and Babylon. The latter would survive the destruction of the former until itself was swallowed up by the Persians. The Egyptiac society. This society emerged in the Nile Valley in the 4th century BC and lasted until the 5th century AD. It had no progenitor societies, nor is it a parent to any other society. It was the longest-lived society in human history. However, Toynbee argues that for half of its length, it was, to quote him, dead but unburied, as only 1/4 of its history was a period of growth. Decline is set in circa 2424 BC, and the breakup of the United Egyptian Kingdom constitutes the society's time of troubles. This was then followed up by a universal state established in 2070 BC and lasted until the end of the 12th dynasty in 1788 BC. The subsequent interregnum led to a Volkawandarung and the invasion and conquest by the Hyksos. Rather miraculously and unexpectedly, the invaders are expelled and the universal state is re-established, with this pattern continuing for the next 2,000 years. The main of this latter period of Egyptian history is the conflict between the worship of Re and Osiris. The former was the priestly state religion, whilst the latter was a popular religion. In order to end the conflict, the priests of Re accommodated Osiris worship into the state religion. This, however, backfired as Osiris worship dominated the Universal Church. The Universal Church became degraded, which is potentially why the Hyksos did not adopt it and found a new society. The only other significant religious change was the new religion created by Akhenaten, but this was short-lived and unsuccessful. The Andean, Yucatec, Mexic, and Mayan societies. These four societies belonged to the Americas prior to the Spanish conquests. The Andean possessed the universal state of the Inca Empire before its destruction in 1530. The Aztecs, meanwhile, were close to forming a universal state for the Mexic society at the same time of Cortez's expedition. The Yucatec society had been absorbed by the Mexics some 400 years prior, and both were offspring of the earlier Maya society, which disappeared in the 7th century. Chapter 3: The Comparability of Societies. Section 1: Civilizations and Primitive Societies. In this section, Toynbee addresses a possible objection to his approach towards history. He tackles the argument that all of the 21 previously mentioned societies have nothing in common other than being intelligible fields of study, which is a vague definition. Toynbee counters this by arguing that distinguishing between what he calls civilized societies and primitive societies, the 21 mentioned societies he has discussed belong to the former category, and that the fact these societies are in a process of civilization is a special feature which makes them unique. He contrasts these to the primitive societies in which there have been a far greater number, yet all are short-lived and have made a marginal impact. Section 2: The Misconception of the Unity of Civilization. In this section, Toynbee addresses another objection, the argument that there is a single universal human civilization. Toynbee states that the reason for this argument is that the West has come to conquer or influence the rest of the world as to create one universal political system. Toynbee concedes that economically and politically, the world is largely universal. However, the cultural situation is very much that it had been. The Western misunderstanding is as a result of an othering of foreign cultures and the dominance of the progressive view of history. Toynbee attacks the linear ordering of history in the terms ancient, medieval, and modern, and suggests Hellenic instead of ancient and Western instead of medieval and modern when looking at our own history. Toynbee then discusses the diffusion theory, which argues that all human civilization is derived from ancient Egypt. He gives the idea some merit, but concludes that it is flawed and it ignores the capacity for independent development and creation. Section 3: The Case for the Comparability of Civilizations. Toynbee addresses a third objection, that the 21 named civilizations cannot be compared as they are not all contemporary, as only 7 are still currently existing. Toynbee counter-argues that as civilizations develop along generational lines, all the contemporary living civilizations are descended from the civilizations of the past, only being separated by relative time. Toynbee then addresses the idea that the 21 societies are not comparable as they're not of equal value. He counters by saying the 21 civilizations have accomplished more than the primitive societies and regards them all of equal value. Toynbee then addresses a final point that which civilizations are just a collection of historical facts. Facts are unique and therefore not comparable. Toynbee counters that though facts are unique, all the civilizations are of the same class, and though they may have differences, this does not invalidate a comparison. Section 4: History, Science, and Fiction. In this last section of the chapter, Toynbee addresses the modes of understanding human life, that of history, science, and fiction. Though all three are on paper separate disciplines, they all complement each other. He draws upon the example of the Iliad, stipulating that if one were to read it as a history, you can't help but notice the fictional elements, while if one were to read it as a fiction, you can't help but see the history within. Toynbee argues that historians who blend fiction into their works are greater than those who do not, the Dryasdust of the world. Historians have done this since the time of Thucydides, whereby speeches are often placed into the mouths of historical personages. He finishes the chapter by elucidating that fiction is best employed when looking at biography or personal relationships, and that history and science are better when studying subjects where there is a far greater quantity of information. Thank you very much for listening to this lecture, and have a Happy New Year.